All right, everybody. It is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight we have Bill Mitchell joining us again. Professor Mitchell has been a frequent contributor to the show, and Mr. Mitchell is one of the foremost experts in modern monetary theory, which has got the world ablaze right now. Folks all over the world are talking about it, and more importantly, within the United States, it is taking center stage in the political debates surrounding a Green New Deal and other major progressive legislation, without which there is no Green New Deal. There is no major progressive legislation because modern monetary theory is the fuel, the knowledge, the lens by which we are able to achieve great things. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on our guest, Professor Mitchell. And with a click of the button, we got him on. How are you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us. So, Bill, the Republicans have come out here recently. I think it was 5 Senate Republicans came out and decided that they want to pass a basically censure, if you will, the concept of modern monetary theory. They want to admonish it and they want to condemn it in some formal vote to say that, hey, we do not support MMT. What do you make of this friggin' clown car that comes out every so often just to remind us how ridiculous Americans can be?
Yeah, I mean, at the level of comedy, it takes some beating, really. Just ridiculous, and it doesn't make the American democratic process look very good from outside. But the other thing is that I had a little look at who the characters involved were, and they hold themselves out as libertarians and freedom lovers, and they've typically got a CV that tells you they've voted against Obamacare. They want to abolish the Department of Education. Some of them advocate abolishing Inland Revenue Service, the Environmental Protection Agency. They all took, or most of them took, heaps of money from the NRA and proudly extol that they're gun-toting Americans and all that sort of stuff. So, that's the libertarian view, but the libertarian view is also that there's freedom of expression. And to use the powers of the legislature to condemn an economic theory is just the height of hypocrisy for those characters. The other thing that I thought of when the bill was sent to me, other than how hysterically funny it was that, I immediately thought of 1933 Germany and burning of the books, that if you don't like an idea in an authoritarian state, then you try to suppress it violently. And then I thought of McCarthyism and a similar type of approach without the burning of the books, but the misuse of the Congress. And then I thought of December 1954, that when the American Congress showed some reasonable behaviour and actually condemned Joe McCarthy. And so the Congress seems to be condemning things, but the serious side of it is that what it tells me is that these characters that have pushed the bill, and behind them will be a whole stack of other characters, they have probably formed the view that the types of policies that may emerge as more and more people understand MMT, and some of the more progressive politicians, particularly in the Democrats, embrace the understandings of MMT and pursue a more progressive policy agenda. And let me be absolutely clear, MMT is agnostic about policy largely, but fortunately it's the progressives that seem to be picking up the understandings and seeing what the scope for government policy is once you understand MMT. And I think those characters who put the bill to Congress have represent vested interests that are now fearful that we might have a progressive wave of policy that'll clean up some of their little rorts and scams. And I think that's a positive outcome. So I'm delighted, actually.
You know, you made the great point that MMT is definitely agnostic across the board. It just is. It's macroeconomics, and the sense that macroeconomics can be political, I guess, is all in the hand of the wielder. But you make another point, and I'd like to make this point maybe more direct. Libertarians are sitting there, as per the usual, trying to take a knock at something that appears to be abandoning fiscal conservatism that allows for an expansionary fiscal policy, which, you know, obviously sends fiscal conservatives into absolute, spasms. They literally don't know what to do with that. But the progressive movement, especially in the United States, has got this twisted concept of what it means to be progressive, and they find themselves trying to make bedfellows with libertarians. They try to find themselves making this, and I say, hey guys, you know what? You don't have to like MMT. It just is what it is. But in order for us to achieve the things you claim to want to achieve, it's not a matter of whether MMT says, it's a matter of, through the lens of MMT, the things you claim to value in society, the things you claim to want, are achievable when you understand the lens that is MMT. And libertarians are clearly not pulling for the same things that progressives are saying they want. I don't understand this conflation, this marrying up. I think people really genuinely, truly do not understand the power of fiscal policy and why it is so vital in a progressive world. We must reclaim the state by reclaiming the public purpose, by reclaiming the power of our birthright, which is our nation's currency, your nation's currency, all people's currencies, in terms of the national sovereign. We've lost that right, and we have it right now, but we've forsaken it because of libertarian-minded ideology. What do you think it will take in the political sphere? And I know you've made many points where you recognize that you're not an expert in American politics, but you are a smart man and you do know these people. You've been around the block. What do you think it's going to take for us to dislodge this big, huge logjam of faith and beliefs that is blocking cognition of what a sovereign fiat currency can do for the people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot in there.
Yes, it is.
Thanks. Monday lunchtime, it's a lot there to talk about. But look, they just one step back. Some of those characters that put up the bill also voted for the tax cuts, which added trillions of dollars, as I understand it, to the US deficit. So they understand full well the capacity of fiscal policy, but they want fiscal policy to be their toy, not the toy for generalised well-being. And that's been the problem all along, that there's never a shortage of public spending when it comes to funding illegal wars that America prosecutes with its mates like Australia and Britain in the Middle East. There's never a shortage of cash and spending then. And when the banks and some of the large industrialists, like the motor car industry in America, were on the in danger of going broke in 2008, there was no shortage of public funding being made available very quickly in very large doses, and none of that lot said a word. And so they understand the capacity of fiscal policy. They just don't want us, as the general people who suffer unemployment and all the rest of it. They don't want us getting access to what fiscal policy can bring. That's the first point to make. The second point that you raised is a really important one, and it's been part of my research agenda for some years now, and that's to try to work out why the progressive side of politics espouses the same sort of macroeconomics, and which leads you to very similar conclusions with respect to policy as the political groupings that they allegedly oppose. So here we've got progressives who claim they stand against these right-wing elites, yet they advocate the same sort of economics that the right-wing elites proffer. And that's the real fundamental problem that we haven't been able to yet make inroads into. So, for example, we've got a federal election in Australia the weekend after next, and the Labor Party, which is formed as the political voice of the trade union movement, it's being advised by economists who have publicly stated that MMT is crazy. Now, they don't even understand what MMT is, but they've bought the simplistic narrative that it means wild printing presses in the bottom of basements of central banks and treasuries going crazy, and these officials running the printing press with their eyes becoming bigger and bigger, and the world basically becoming out of control as a consequence. And they sell that story because it's the story that the population has been fed by conservative think tanks, by conservative academics and what have you. And the progressives buy into this. And so they, in your jurisdiction, in your country, you've got the Democrats with this pay for nonsense that everything's got to be paid for. Well, everything is paid for in the form of real resources, but that's not the way they talk, and that's a fundamental problem that we've got a hurdle that that's in the political sphere. That's where we've got to jump over, and it's going to take a long time because these views are incredibly embedded, and it goes back to the work I've done with Louisa Connors on framing and language. We've got to learn to reframe our arguments, and the American MMT colleagues are doing a great job in that sense, and certainly around the world we're trying to reframe the debate in our language and terminology, and that takes a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight. I can't hear you, Steve.
The IPCC came out a little while ago, telling us that we had 12 years. That was a year ago that they said that. So we have 11 years now to actually take decisive action to address the climate change problem, should you believe the IPCC report. When I think to myself, how would we marshal resources to address this problem? I literally, and I'm obviously not an economist. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a supply chain guy here. But there's got to be something to the fact that MMT and survival kind of work together here. If you're a believer in the coming the issues that have been raised by the IPCC and have been raised forever. I mean, science has been saying that we are facing significant, very, very harsh realities with regards to the changing climate. I mean, do we have time? I mean, where does that leave us if you consider the long view, and then you consider the here and present? I mean, the two timelines don't line up, Bill. I mean, I don't see a path forward there. And that frightens me, quite frankly. I mean, it terrifies me.
Yeah, I mean, I gave a talk the other night to Climate Action Group in Australia, and the thing is that I don't know about climate change. I'm not a climate scientist, but I'm educated and I understand the balance of probabilities, I think. And you've got to take as a citizen, I have to take the messages that are coming out from very robust science in that area, that there's an urgency. I don't know what the urgency is exactly, but what I said to this group the other night is the way in which my profession, the mainstream of my profession, frame these problems is as trade-offs. And so what they say is that, yes, wealth generation and income generation, production, may well damage the environment and cause pollution. And that's a bad, and the productions are good. And that what you need is some sort of trade-off, that you have goods and bads being traded off to some optimal state. And there's all these mathematical models that'll exercise the gymnastics of that sort of routine. But the problem is that when we're dealing with biological systems, then we don't know what the trade-off is at the point. We don't know the point at which they die. So the concept of a trade-off, that you can just sort of keep pushing these frontiers with more production, a bit more pollution, trying to get the balance stuff correct, is to me a very dangerous narrative and a dangerous framework, because rivers die and biological systems die, and we don't know as economists when they will. And even the climate change scientists don't exactly know when either. So what that tells me as a citizen is I want my policymakers to be very risk averse and adopt a very aggressive policy environment and activism, just in case, so that we do everything we can in our capacity and with technology and what have you, to do everything we can just in case it happens tomorrow. Now, it may, people point out the Club of Rome in the early 70s got it all wrong. Well, their predictions haven't necessarily didn't come to fruition at the sort of time they were saying, but that led to more activism on the environmental front to where we are now, with the ability now to shift very, very quickly to renewables, and the capacity to alter our transport systems and that. And I think that policy should be going gung ho in that direction, and not be cautious at all. And so Green New Deal has to be a very far-reaching agenda, and it has to be pretty much now. That's because the biology dies.
So, I went to see the Sunrise Movement the other day. They had a local town hall, if you will, talking about a Green New Deal. And that was just here in small town Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They're having them all over the place. We've covered them in California and Boston and all over the country. And what you find is that as progressives who tend to want to protect the environment, just even if we weren't in a dangerous spot, we are in a dangerous spot. At least most of us believe so, based on what we've heard through the science, through the writings, through the warnings of some of the popularizers of the climate movement. We are convicted, if you will, that this is the thing we must take on. In fact, I believe Stephanie Kelton was asked, what she thought was the most important issue, and this was at Stony Brook, I believe. And I believe she said climate, the environment as well. So, assuming only assuming that we're right and that this is catastrophic and it's coming, how would you sell that concept, if you will, as an economist with a near and present danger to a population that has heard it all before, and yet at the same time needs to know that we can in fact solve these problems, period. It's not an issue of being able to afford to survive. We can afford to survive. How would you sell
Yeah,
that?
look,
What would the framing of that be like?
look, I think there's a number of things. The first thing that, and I'm thinking in terms of the current election campaign in Australia, the federal campaign, is that a number of independent conservative candidates, so we have a two-party political system, broadly, allegedly conservative and progressive, but the Labor Party are basically neoliberals. But we've got now a number of independent conservative candidates, so they're fiscally conservative but socially liberal, that's the way they sell themselves, contesting federal seats now in electorates where the sitting Conservative member is a climate change denier. And these are seats that are historically very conservative. And the reason that they're gaining traction, and the polling is telling us that the independents are likely to turn over the long-sitting members. And the reason for that is because the number one political issue in this federal election in Australia is now climate change. And that's capturing the attention of older voters who are thinking about their children and their grandchildren, and it's capturing the attention of the younger voters coming into the system who may be conservative in outlook but are fiercely aware of the climate challenges of the future. So I think, and I see that around the world where I travel in political debates. And so you're getting this sort of convergence of historically the older voters and the younger voters in our democracies have had different agendas. And what climate change is doing around the world is creating a convergence of these big voting blocks. The younger voters and the older voters are now starting to rally around the same issue. And I think that's an incredibly prospective sort of outlook. Now, the other thing that what we can do is last Wednesday I gave this talk to Climate Action, and I did a little quiz at the beginning, and everybody in the room, bar a few, probably would have failed the quiz. I didn't actually ask them to disclose their answers, but they all admitted. The vast majority admitted they failed. After a 35-minute, we did a bit of role playing with fiscal policy. I brought some people up a person up from the audience to be the non-government sector, and we did a bit of spending and taxation, and to demonstrate basic core MMT principles relating to the role of fiscal policy, the role of surpluses and deficits in terms of with income growth and savings, and providing the capacity to create social and environmental change. And by the end of the evening, if we had had the quiz again, nobody would have failed that quiz. They all could understand very basic MMT principles. We didn't get too elaborate or too technical. The role playing was very effective. And at the end of the audience, end of the evening, maybe 120 people who walked into that room with neoliberal perceptions, even though very committed to climate action and very progressive in their social policies, walked into that auditorium, neoliberal macro, walked out MMTers.
That's brilliant.
And that sort of activity is happening now all around the world, not just in me giving presentations or Stephanie or Randy or whatever giving presentations, but through social media groups and all the different modalities of social media and what have you. That activity is increasing. Now, no other I think I can say this pretty confidently. No other economic idea has permeated the public debate and the public consciousness, if you like, than MMT. And that's because we're of the social media generation. That's because we started to disseminate our ideas after some years of frustration of disseminating them in the traditional academic way. We started to disseminate them through blog posts and then through Twitter and forums, and we're talking today in social media. And so I think that we're making much more rapid traction in the public debate, getting these basic MMT ideas into the hands of people who typically wouldn't have been interested in economics at all, and who are now, in my view, as qualified as macroeconomists as people who claim to have PhDs in macroeconomics. And so I think that, and I understand the tension between the urgency of climate action and the slowness in which ideas permeate into society. But I think we're accelerating that that adoption of or that injection of new ideas and the take up of them, and we've just got to keep at it. And that's why I advocate relentlessness on behalf of the MMT group to really keep taking every opportunity to build these ideas up into people's minds. And 120 last Wednesday. This Wednesday I'm in Edinburgh, Thursday Glasgow, Saturday Birmingham. Another 120 or whatever will leave as MMTers, and we've just got to keep that action going.
That's just incredible. That's great news. Well, that brings me to another point. So obviously, you kind of talked about the varying modal operations that go on within the MMT movement, if you will. I don't know that I want to call it a movement, but it's definitely a movement of sorts. And within the community, we have different roles, different places that we operate and stuff like that. We've talked at length about this offline, and I'd like to kind of try and talk about it here a little bit. There appears to be times where the academic side of this and the activism side of this appear to be at loggerheads. And there's times where the various stratums of, who's talking to who isn't lining up. Like, for example, activists are obviously fighting for their causes, and they're fighting for them in their own fashion for their own purposes. And then the MMT academics are fighting for their school of knowledge, the work that they've done, the empirical work that they've done, and to be able to have it accepted and used as the lens, the primary lens to displace the orthodoxy. How do we marry the two desires, the two approaches, the two, well, there's multiple, but let's just keep them at two for now. How do we better build bridges within the two sectors, if you will? Because I feel there's friction, and I feel that there's friction in such a way that while friction, certainly iron sharpens iron, and that's a good thing, it also is the thing that erodes away the shorelines of rivers and stuff like that also. So the question I have is, how do you build strong bridges with people that are in varying places, such as academics with activists?
It's a difficult issue. The starting point is that we abandon ego, and that we accept that each weekend after the football in Australia, they interview players and they say, "Oh, I was just playing." The latest sort of the corporate sort of narrative coming out of these football players when they're interviewed after the game is, "Oh, I've just played my role. I just played my role," and it just becomes ridiculous how often they say it. But the point is that we all have roles to play in this agenda, and I've been asked at public presentations, why don't I be more political? And the answer I give is because I've got a role to play. And my role is that as an academic who's got the extremely privileged position of being able to sit in front of books and think and write my thinking and my working out of things. That's my role. My role is to create and lay down a body of work. And that body of work, and my role is also to try to make that body of work accessible to the public. And so I'm an educator. That's the way I think of myself as in my professional capacity. My professional capacity as an economist. Now, then people say, well, why aren't you more concerned with the marketing of your ideas? Well, I am concerned about the marketing. I want the ideas to spread because I think they're founded on very robust research and thought. And I do want them to, and they obviously have a very practical application. And as a citizen, my value system is very progressive, as most people will probably know by now. So I'm certainly not wanting to sit back sitting in the sun with my ego being massaged that I've thought up these things with some of my colleagues. So clearly, I want marketers to come in, and I want people who know how to sell things, and I want people. Not that I would want to consider the ideas to be products, but they're ideas that have to be explained to people outside of a formal education process. And in that context, I need other people to play their roles. I need you, Steve, to play your role. And you do that very well. And so if as long as we don't have these ego boundaries, then those sort of different roles should be able to mesh really beautifully and to create a great big wall of action. That's what we need. We need the ideas being translated into action that everybody can understand and take forward into their own specific policy agendas, like climate action, like public transport, like all the other things, public health, employment, regional diversity, reductions in inequality. They're all agendas, and not everybody can be across all of the agendas at the same time. So we need everybody to be playing these individual roles. Now, the issue then arises, as to quality control. And Warren Mosler and I have certainly had a little discussions over the past about quality control. And one of the dangers, I think, is that when people get enthusiastic and great, is that they sometimes get the bull by the horns. And is that an American expression?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is
that an expression in America?
They want to grab the bull by the horns and take over.
Yeah, and the problem is that then the ideas, the original, the core ideas start becoming watered down and misrepresented and co-opted to, in some cases, to specific agendas. And then we start getting criticised. The original ideas start getting criticised because people start quoting, oh, this was said on Twitter, for example, or this was said in Facebook. And that's where tension creeps in, because I don't want people on Twitter tweeting that MMT is about printing money.
Right.
But I see it. I don't want to see my ideas on Twitter represented as we can have everything now. I've seen it. I don't want people on Twitter saying the Green New Deal is an easy thing because the government can buy whatever it wants. And that's what MMT says. And so that then tension creeps in, because we've got a quality control problem. That how do we make sure that the ideas that we've developed and we call MMT are represented in the mainstream social media debate, for example, correctly, so that we don't raise expectations so that unduly, so that we keep a relentlessness that is going to create true social change and climate action and what have you, and all of that. So that's the problem, and I think that just comes down to continuing education. I send a few little messages off the record to people to quality control messages without being displaying any arrogance at all, I hope. I just see myself as like a carpenter or a plumber or an accountant or something, just doing my job. I'm just good at, I was just good at doing research, I thought, and I wasn't very good at hammering in nails. And so, we've all got a place to play. The academics aren't higher up in any social hierarchy, even though society places them in that position. And I think it's also, this came up at the last MMT conference, where some people in the audience said to Randy and I, we were on the podium, "You're our heroes." Well, please, that's not something that's not a great way of being with each other. That I don't want to be someone's hero. I just want to have someone understand that my work has given them some value, and that they can take that forward. Just in the same way that when an electrician comes to fix our house, they give value to me through their work, and that's the way I think of my work. I'm just a worker, and we shouldn't have these rankings and hierarchies that academics are in some way higher up in some social ordering. We get paid more than a plumber, well, maybe not anymore, but you know what I mean. So I think we've just got to continually be working to break down those sort of barriers and realise that we've all got a role to play, and do it 100%.
Well, I want to interrupt you momentarily here, because I have something that I feel is important to say in regards, especially to the hero portion of this. I certainly appreciate what you're saying, because I agree with you at the base level that, we're looking for everybody's doing their job and so forth. But you understand that we've been lied to for so long, Bill, that I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out how many suicides go on for hopelessness because of the economic system, and how many families break up as a direct result of neoliberal austerity. And the fact that people are no longer seeing hope as a real thing. Like like what? The bottom line here is that we have a situation, Bill, where people need to know that there is hope, and you guys have provided us a pathway to hope. Bill, if you can hear me, I'm just letting you know, you guys have lit a fire under all of us, and all of us feel a sense of hope, which is what's pushing us to go further. Hopefully that hope, whether it translates to somebody seeing you as a hero, or whether it translates into someone just simply being appreciative of your work, whatever the terminology may be, I feel that it's an appropriate thing given the fact that somebody couldn't see 1 minute, and then the next minute they can see. 1 minute they couldn't walk, and the next minute they could walk. To me, the lens of which MMT provides me personally took a guy who had no hope and gave me hope. So if you want to consider that as part of the overall story, the narrative, I would suggest considering where that comes from so that you understand how important it is to most of us that have gotten on board with pushing MMT to the public, that it is the only thing that's giving us hope right now. Our political system is terrible. Our elections are terrible. The people, most of them, are ready to roll over for a neoliberal like Biden. We're not talking about a country full of hope. We're talking about a country full of people willing to accept whatever's thrown at them. And MMT has taught us that we don't have to accept that. So, in any event, what I'm going to do, because Bill can't hear my voice right now, you all can, but Bill cannot. So what I'm going to do without further ado is basically thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Bring Bill on here. We're going to say goodbye to Bill, and we're going to say thank you all very much for a great show, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.